Good evening everyone, and welcome to a very quick review and summary of some of the composition tips that we have reviewed in the course of this term. Now, a composition given to you during an examination is a very quick matter. You need to finish writing within 50 minutes, and in 50 minutes you've got to have a quick plan, an idea of what you want to cover, and some of the useful words and phrases you'd like to include. Now remember that the question will be accompanied by helping words. By all means, make full use of these helping words to structure and to include into your composition to make the language more colorful and interesting. Alright, without further ado, let's get into an example of a composition that Mr. Pang has written. Right, now when you look at a question such as this, there are two aspects you must always pay attention to. One is the picture. Right, there are three pictures in this case. How many pictures must you write about at least? That's right, one. You should be based on one or more of these pictures. You could use one, two, or three. But bear in mind that the more pictures you choose, the more narrow and the more focused your story has to be. You have to include all the pictures you choose. So Mr. Pang's suggestion is to just choose one picture or at most two in order to give your story more room to grow. So that's the first part, looking at the picture. The second part is the question. Now, over here you'll find that you are to write a composition about a friendship. In other words, the theme, the main subject of my story has to be about friendship. In this case, looking at the two pictures on the top, I can see that it involves two friends because they're holding hands, and perhaps a separation or a parting. They're leaving each other for some reason. And since this note, goodbye and all the best, is written on a blackboard or a whiteboard, I could reasonably deduce that it could be graduation, that these two good friends are about to go separate ways because they're leaving their primary schools. So that's the story, in a nutshell, Mr. Pang is going to write about this evening. So bear in mind the pointers at the bottom here. Who was that friend? Why was the friendship meaningful? Could be some points that you can include or help you in planning your story, but are not compulsory. The important things are the picture and the theme. Alright, without further ado, let's look into the story that Mr. Pang has written using the first two pictures and the theme of a friendship. Alright, and we'll see how I've included certain features in using some of the strategies and tips that we've learned in the last term. Alright, remember, any composition follows a story mountain structure with an introduction on my left elbow, a rising action coming up my forearm. In this case, the rising action could also be the problem. A climax, which is the main, more important part of my story, right at the peak of my fingertips. The falling action, or conclusion and coda, my right forearm and my right elbow. So this is the story mountain that my story must follow. Introduction, rising action or problem, climax, and conclusion and coda. So let's look at the introduction. Beginning with dialogue. I wonder whether we will still be able to meet after today, Jane asked Emily sadly. So here I have my two female characters, remember, in the picture before, two girls holding hands. So they're Jane and Emily, and Jane asks Emily this question very sadly. And all the words in red are adverbs. Remember, adverbs describe how an action takes place. In this case, how Jane asked Emily, sadly. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Now notice I didn't say Emily was sad or Emily was depressed because I'm using the technique of show, not tell. Instead of telling you that Emily was really sad, she was really down, I describe Emily's eyes filled with tears. And the reason for this? It was the last day of school for the girls, and it was also their graduation day. Now, graduation day is when we end our schooling days in a particular school and get ready to move on to the next stage of our studies. So it was the graduation day for Emily and Jane. The classroom was decorated with balloons and streamers. Soft music played on the computer, and the whiteboard was filled with messages from their teachers wishing them all the best. Now notice I have colored in green all of the descriptive phrases that use my 5 senses. In this case, the decorations are what I see. The music is what I hear. And once again, the messages that I read on the whiteboard from the teachers are what I see. So is it necessary to use all 5 senses all at once? No, but I use the senses that add to the description and the detail of my story. So now my setting is a classroom filled with balloons and streamers and with the backdrop of a whiteboard filled with messages written by the teachers of these graduating students. So that makes my introduction. My characters are Jane and Emily. They're feeling really sad, and the setting is a classroom of graduating students. Let's move on now to the next section, which is the problem or rising action. So the air was filled with the excited chatter of students as they waited for the last bell to sound. Remember, the sound of excited chatter. Jane glanced wistfully around. Wistfully. This is describing how Jane glanced. Wistfully, regretfully. She could not bear to leave this classroom. This would be the last time they shared a classroom together as a class. Right? So Jane was feeling sad because it was the very last period of the very last day of her time in her primary school. So I'm sure we can feel the same way as Jane feels. Friends forever, Emily whispered softly as she held Jane's hand tightly. Now remember the picture, the 2 girls holding hands. The 2 girls were the best of friends, but they had decided to go to different schools. Now we have the reason why they're feeling sad. They had decided to go to different schools. The sadness in their hearts over the coming separation kept them from joining in the class celebration. So remember, there was music playing, the class was excited, they were waiting for the last bell to ring, they were really, really looking forward to the end of the last term. But the 2 girls were feeling sad because they knew that they were about to be separated. They would no longer attend the same school. So this kept them from joining in the class celebration. So that's the problem. They were sad even though the entire class was really excited. So now we move on to the climax. How the girls felt, their sadness and how they overcame it. Ding dong! The sound of the last chime for the day reverberated loudly through the air. So notice the sounds, the adverbs. The children gave a loud shout of joy as they celebrated the end of their primary school days. But even as these children are celebrating, tears flowed freely down Jane and Emily's faces. Again, show not tell, as they remembered the memories they had shared in this classroom. The 2 friends embraced warmly and sobbed inconsolably while they were surrounded by their jubilant classmates. So even as everyone was shouting, "Yay, the last bell! We are no longer primary school students, hooray!" Even while that was going on, the 2 friends were embraced and sobbing because they were sad that they were about to leave each other for different schools. So I'm sure you can agree that this is the most perhaps eventful part of the story, the climax, where the sadness of the girls finds its expression in the way that they're sobbing inconsolably, meaning they could not stop crying. It was a sad moment for them. So now we move to the last part of the story, which is the conclusion coda. "Don't be sad, Jane," Emily whispered. So now Emily's turn to whisper. "Where there is a will, there is a way. We will stay in touch." Now, Emily being positive and strong. Jane nodded tearfully, and a bright smile dawned on her face. So Emily succeeded in comforting Jane, and Jane broke into a bright smile. The two friends got up from their seats and ran exuberantly over to join the class celebration. They knew their friendship would not end with their graduation. The end. I hope you liked that story, and I hope that story helped you to remember the major techniques that we've been talking about, namely the use of adverbs. I haven't highlighted adjectives, but they were definitely in the story. The use of the five senses, namely sight, sound, feeling, and sometimes even smell, but in this case, not so much about food, so it's more about sight and sound. And of course, show not tell. Instead of telling me how sad they were, I show how sad they were, right? And if you notice, all of the underlined words were consistently in the past tense. So watch your tenses, kids. That's one of your major weaknesses. Keep your story in the past tense, unless you are writing dialogue. And remember, not too much of that. Not too much dialogue. So once again, remember to use adjectives and adverbs to color your story to make it more interesting. Remember, you want to have sight, sound, smell, taste, the five senses, to make your story come alive. Remember that you want to use a wide variety of words. You want to keep them in the correct tenses, and you want to make sure that your story has the 5 elements of the story mountain. Remember to check your work. Keep your paragraphs not too long, not too short either. Remember, the guideline is about 4 to 5 paragraphs will be good. And all will be well. All the best for tomorrow, kids. Remember all we've gone through. Remember all I've taught you. Review this video if you need to a couple of times, just to remind yourself of the things to include. Tenses, always check them. Subject-verb agreement rule, always check them. Remember to paragraph your work between 4 to 5 paragraphs. Remember to leave a line. These are the basics. All right, enough. All the best, everyone. And I look forward to hearing good news from all of you after your composition exam tomorrow. Good night.